G'day fellow pilots, Reaver's back from the cockpit of the Mi-24 Hind once again here, lovely South Atlantic map. This is the bottom helicopter landing site for Mount Alice remote radar head in the Falkland Islands, a place with which I am intimately familiar, having spent a little bit of time down here. What we're going to talk about today is the Mi-24's autopilot system, stability systems, in particular the yaw channel, which gives people some grief. We'll talk about what it's doing, why it's doing that, how you can use it, and ways that you can set up your controls that you might find useful for better control in the Mi-24. Now, other YouTubers have done some excellent videos, very detailed videos, and I know there's very detailed guides on the forums as well about what the autopilot's actually doing and how it does it. This is not going to be in that much depth. This is going to be a pilot's overview, so if you're flying the Hind, you can get an idea about why your aircraft's doing the things it's doing. So, the autopilot panel is located down near your left knee, and what we're specifically interested in is these row of three lights and button assemblies here. It gives us the pitch, roll and yaw autopilot channels. Pitch and roll are very simple. They're controlled off the aircraft's gyroscopes, which you turn on the panel across here, gyros, and they essentially are trying to hold the aircraft at a specific pitch and bank fuselage attitude. So when you're using your cyclic and you use the force trim, the aircraft is commanded to maintain a set pitch and roll attitude, and the autopilot's going to work with the gyros in order to try and do that. It's got an authority of about 18%, and it will disengage when you hit certain bank angles. However, it usually does a pretty good job of things like maintaining speed when in level flight, maintaining gentle banks up to about 30 or so degrees, and generally being useful as a stability aid in all areas of flight. You'll certainly notice a difference if you turn this off and try and hover the aircraft. It behaves in a much more unstable way. It actually behaves like the Apache behaves, which is really weird for an aircraft that's several years younger than it. But anyway, the yaw channel is doing something slightly different. It has two modes. It has a heading hold mode and a stability mode. And these modes are changed by the actions of the pilot placing their feet on the pedals, which is in the game referred to as the micro switches. Inside these pedals there are little electronic switches that when the pilot puts their feet on them, they make a contact and they enable the pilot to override the autopilot. And I say override, what I mean is change it from heading hold mode, which it's in right now, to stability mode, which allows the pilot to turn the aircraft and use the yaw channel to stabilise that turn, but without the aircraft trying to hold its particular heading. Now, what we'll do is we will bring the Hind into a hover. I will take my feet entirely off the pedals, which is entirely unnatural for me, and I have trimmed using my on-stick cyclic yaw trimmer, micro switch trimmer button, which you can bind in the special options in the control settings. I've trimmed the aircraft to maintain this heading, so we're sat about 280 or so, or 285. So if I now apply power and keep my feet entirely off the pedals, you will notice things happening. You will notice in the top right that the H, so the far left hand bar, will start to move to the right as the autopilot applies input to the tail rotor to try and keep the aircraft on heading. What's very likely to happen is that you will see a Cyrillic letter appear to the bottom right, and the physical pedals down on the floor of the aircraft will move. What's happening there is your autopilot channel is running out of authority and is saying, I can't keep this aircraft on the heading that you've asked me to maintain without moving the pedals, so I'm going to have to move your physical pedals in order to maintain that heading and give myself the authority to maintain the heading you've commanded me to do. Now you can turn that off in the special options to pedals auto move setting. But what you'll find will happen is if you're using your autopilot in this way and you hit the limits of the autopilot's authority, the nose will snap left or right because the autopilot will hit the limits of its authority and the aircraft will just do whatever it's going to do at that given point in time. Whereas with this, the autopilot will move the pedals as it needs in order to maintain the heading that you've commanded it to maintain. This has positive effects if you want to completely keep your feet off the pedals. This allows the autopilot to do the work for you. It's not as precise as manually flying it, but it's certainly going to do a reasonable job. The drawback is if you allow the autopilot to move the pedals, what you'll find is you will have a limit of authority of physical pedal movement on one side or the other, compared to if you had total control over the pedals yourself. You will run out of travel in the virtual pedals before you run out of travel in your physical pedals, for example, in one way or the other, and I'll demonstrate that in a moment. So at the moment the aircraft's trimmed to remain level on this heading, and I'm going to apply power, and I'm going to action the cyclic and collective only, and not the anti-torque pedals. And let's see what happens here. You can see the bar moving on the top right. You see the nose trying to come round, but if we smoothly apply power, the aircraft is applying more and more authority, and you'll watch the physical pedals move down below. Just going to bring that aircraft back onto heading. I'm still not touching the pedals. And we're up. The aircraft is doing all of this work. So, as you can see, without me touching the pedals, the autopilot channel has maintained roughly, so within 5 degrees, the heading that it was commanded to maintain. And if we move off, see the pedals just got moved again. It's run out of authority because of the power I'm applying. If we move off, then we can see the aircraft is very stable under autopilot alone. And pretty much bang on heading, which is great. Now, when I retrim the aircraft, if I retrim using the stick, all I've done in that set case is I've retrimmed the gyros only. So I'm retrimming the pitch and roll autopilot channels and not the yaw channel. So how do we, little graphical issues there, but that's Mount Alice remote radar HUD up there. How do we retrim the yaw? So there's two ways of doing it. You can either do it by using the pedals, and there are special options to overcome the micro switches or use the micro switches. So I have my pedals set that movement of the pedals overrides the micro switch. So I can make nice coordinated turns with the micro switches engaged. And when I return my pedal axis to neutral, it disables the micro switches. Okay, so if I move my pedals away from neutral now, it will overcome the micro switch. See the H bar move, and then when I put my pedals back into neutral, the autopilot channel's re-engaged. Okay, that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is using the micro switch trim button, which I have bound on my cyclic. And if I push that button, it disables the autopilot channel, and I release it, and it allows the aircraft to stabilise again. Okay, so that's the two ways of doing it. Why does this matter? Well, if I show you what I see a lot of people doing with the aircraft, if I trim my aircraft to maintain, well, it's just ahead of about 290, so let's do my gyro trims, my pitch and roll trim, and my heading and my yaw channel trim, and that's the aircraft setup. So if I now take my feet off the pedals, so I don't move the pedals, and I try now and turn the aircraft left, the autopilot is trying desperately to keep the aircraft heading 290 degrees, and it's winning at the moment. We are now in a side slip with the nose pointing, well, 280. It's not, it's not perfect, but it's trying to keep that aircraft pointing where I've asked it to point, because all the autopilot knows is I want to fly 290 degrees. And this is why I see a lot of people flying round and round sideways in a hind, because they're not overcoming the yaw autopilot by use of the micro switches. So what you need to do in order to turn the hind effectively is one of two things. You either need to press and hold the micro switch button on your cyclic or collective, which will overcome the autopilot channel. That's me with the micro switch button held down. And if I re-engage it, just head over here, trim the aircraft down, re-engage that. Or alternatively, you have the pedals set to, when they move away from the neutral position, the micro switch engages. Central position trimmer mode with the pedals and the cyclic here. I roll, left boot, and the nose come round. Now the reason I have it set so that movement away from the centre position gives me authority over the micro switches, or authority over the yaw channel, is that coordination of turns is easier this way. So you'll notice that when I'm turning left, the ball on the ADI is centred, giving us a nice, coordinated, aerodynamically efficient turn. If you try and turn the aircraft, if I bring the aircraft out of trim, there's just that ball slipping left, all sorts of problems start to occur in terms of I now require more power. The speed is going to drop because I'm now presenting a big barn door side of the aircraft into the relative wind. We've got all sorts of things going on. It's just not very efficient. The aircraft's going to work harder in order to achieve the thing that you're asking it to do. Whereas if we yaw the aircraft into the turn, centre everything up, see, immediately I require less power to perform this manoeuvre, making the aircraft more aerodynamically efficient, which is what we want really, to be working with the aircraft, not against the aircraft. So what are we doing when we activate those micro switches? Well, essentially we're taking the aircraft out of heading hold mode and putting it into stabilisation mode. So when those micro switches are engaged, either by the use of the micro switch button, which I have bound onto my cyclic, or by use of moving the pedals away from neutral, we are taking the autopilot out of one mode, heading hold, and putting it into another mode, which is stability mode, which enables you to make nice, gentle, coordinated turns. The thing to remember, when you're turning with the hind and the autopilot is in stability mode, under this control setup, so with your pedal axis away from neutral disables the micro switches, or enables the micro switches, sorry. If I trim the aircraft on the cyclic for a turn to the right, I have to keep my pedals off the neutral axis. If I turn my pedals to neutral, the aircraft's going to want to maintain heading, because we're now in a turn. So it's something you've just got to be aware of as the aircraft's moving around. There we go. It's going to struggle now. What I've also found is with the Mi-24 that it can struggle with very slow turns, very, very slight turns. If you do a very gentle left or right turn, the aircraft can struggle to recognise the pedals have been pushed and you can find sometimes your nose is a little bit jerky coming round to the left or right. Usually you'll see that you just apply a little bit more pedal and everything's fine, everything's dandy, and you'll carry on doing as you were doing. But yeah, so roll and then a little bit of boot, and you'll feel it. If you don't do it, you'll know you've not done it. The aircraft nose will just stay where it is, and you can make fairly nice smooth turns in a hind, coordinated with the anti-torque pedals. So don't be afraid of the Your Autopilot. I think there's a little bit of misconception about what it's doing and how difficult a system it is to use. It is trying to help you. I know a lot of people fly with the Your Autopilot channels out, but if you're going to be flying the hind as part of a group, especially if you're going to be leading formations and thinking about things other than flying the aircraft, right? The aim of this, or all of this technology and all of this assistance, is to increase capacity for the pilot. So it's enabling the pilot to take their mind off flying the aircraft, so that their mind can be occupied with other things, safety of flight, tactics, techniques, procedures, that kind of activity that's going to make the aircraft effective in combat, and essentially increase the safety of the aircraft in general, as we fly back towards Mount Alice at the moment. So yeah, don't be afraid of it. Turn that little green button on, learn to love it, and set up your controls in a way that makes sense for you. Now you know what it's doing, knowledge is power, and you can work with the aircraft to achieve better results. So now I'm literally flying with my hands and feet off the pedals, and the aircraft's maintaining off the controls, and the aircraft's maintaining straight level flight. No whole programs are engaged. The aircraft's just doing its thing. Okay, and as a result, I can now look out around the aircraft. I can be down playing with instruments. I can be doing all the good stuff. Whereas if I've not got that Your channel stability, I've still got to have my mind on the pedals and what it's doing. I've got to be looking back up at what's occurring and taking all that mental processing, that division of task away from what I want to be doing, and looking outside and making sure my navigation's correct, making sure my aircraft's safe, there's no threats, etc, etc. So thank you for your time and listening to me today. I hope that's made sense and has provided a little bit more information and education about how the hind works and what it's doing. Don't be afraid of it. If you've got any questions, chuck them in the comments. And thank you very much for listening. Have a safe day.